Various factors go into determining the worth of a comic: rarity, age, issue number, and its condition. Comic book grading assigns a universal numerical value based on a 0 to 10 point scale that allows collectors to know what condition a certain issue is in. In this video, I will be showing you how to pseudo-grade your own issues so that you can determine whether or not to have them officially graded or to simply give yourself an idea of how well your collection is being maintained. So to get started, we need some things. First, we need a white space with plenty of room to work with. Next, I suggest getting a cover of some kind, like a tablecloth, to protect your comics from any dust or grime on the surface of your workstation. Finally, get some disposable gloves to wear, and make sure they are form-fitting and powder-free. That way you won't get anything on your comic books when you're inspecting them. Also, I like having a copy of grading guidelines nearby for reference. I included a link to the ones I'm using in the description. I like them because they're very descriptive and straight to the point. Okay, now that we have everything we need, let's get started. So maybe you have a key issue in your collection that you aren't sure is good enough to get graded, and you'd like to inspect it before paying to have someone else grade it for you. Maybe you have multiple copies of the same issue, and you need to determine which one has the better chance of getting a high grade. This video will help you with that. I'm going to show you two examples of two aged comic books that I own, and I'm going to show you what to look for. So here's an old school Superman issue I thought would be fun to grade. This is actually one of the first comic books I ever owned as a kid. I bought it at a flea market years ago. But before you inspect your comic books, be sure to be wearing your gloves. The reason you want to be wearing your gloves is because you don't want to get any of the oils on your fingertips on the comic while you're inspecting it. Remember, the point is to maintain your comic books as pristine as possible. The higher quality and the higher condition, the higher grade they'll get. I highly suggest getting some plastic covers for your comic books and putting some cardboard backings in them. The reason is that the plastic will protect the comic from any damage or any stains, and the cardboard will help maintain its rigidness. So when inspecting your comic book, you're looking at a lot of things. You pretty much want it to be as new or look as new as possible. So the first thing I'm doing here is I want to see how rigid it is. You want to be very careful when doing this. You don't want it to fold, but it seems like it's pretty rigid. Here in the top, we notice that there is some clear folds up, and here in the bottom, unfortunately, we do have some stains. That's not ideal, but you know, what are you gonna do? In the bottom, we do have some tiny folds too, not too much of a big deal, but you know. And here, and then while inspecting the spine, we do notice that the spine actually looks pretty good. We do have some damage right there, and then the corner looks a little folded. But to be honest, the issue does look pretty good. Always look at the staples of the comic book on the spine. You want to make sure that they're not rusted or that they're not falling off. These actually look pretty good, so I'm very happy. And you can see that there is still some gloss on the cover, so that's very good. And then let's begin inspecting our pages. So right off the bat, you can probably tell that this comic book, like I said, is aged. The colors have kind of started to fade away, and here you can clearly see the stains from the front. Actually, it looks like we found some new ones. And you can see that the pages have begun to yellow. Now, ideally, you want your pages to be as white as possible. Now, you might not be able to notice it on the video, but let me give you an example. This is a new issue, or relatively new. I bought it about a year and a half ago, but I never got around to reading it. So this is literally the first time it's been out of its packaging since I put it in there. But here you can clearly see that the pages are white, and not only are they white, there's actually a gloss over them. And when you compare them to the comic book we're inspecting, you can see that the pages have become darker and that they've lost their gloss. But again, you know, like you saw right there, this issue came out in 1993, so that's over 20 years a 20-year lifespan, so it is understandable that over the years it has become a little worn. But so you want to make sure that none of the pages are falling off. Give them a little yank, not too much, but just to make sure that they're not falling off and that the spine isn't falling apart. Be careful when flipping your pages too. You don't want to make any new folds. But for the sake of time, I've sped up the footage. But pretty much what we're doing is we're going through each page and we're looking for any defects. That could include tears, stains, any missing pages. You want to make sure that the comic book is complete, because if it isn't, that does bring down your grade. Here we actually found a tear, and it's a pretty substantial tear, to be honest. That kind of that's upsetting, but what are you gonna do? If you find a tear though, be sure not to pick at it. Remember, you don't want it to get any worse than it already is. And a tear doesn't necessarily mean that your comic book is gonna get a low grade. Usually if it's 1 or 2, it doesn't really affect it, but you want to make at least we lucked out and no piece of the comic book was actually missing, which is good. And you want to keep inspecting your comic books, your comic book, and you want to make sure that when you're inspecting you don't fold any of the pages. Make sure that's all there. You inspect the cover just how you did the front, and there you go. If I had to give this comic book a grade, I'd give it anywhere between a 5 to a 7. I think it's in pretty good quality given its age. Now this comic book is another oldie. I got it the same time I got the previous comic book, but you can clearly tell that it's a little more damaged. Now I didn't actually get it in a plastic covering. I got it the way you see it right there, and it seems like it's been handed around a bit. That it's been read a couple times, and I'll explain why in a bit. But okay, the first thing we're doing is we're checking how rigid it is. We're checking for any folds in the top. You can see there is some damage there in the corner, and there is folds. Now we're checking the staples, and you can see there is significant damage around the staples. Like I said, it looks like it's been read a couple times, quite a bit, and there's a lot of damage around the spine and a lot of damage around the staples, way more than our previous example. The bottom of the comic book seems to be the worst. For whatever reason, it seems like there's a tiny strip of comic book missing, and as you saw, there is 2 tears in the comic book, which is not ideal. You want your comic book to be as complete as possible, and here our cover page nonetheless is clearly incomplete because of the tears. There does seem to still be some gloss, but whoa, you can clearly tell that it's very aged. The pages are very yellow compared to our newer edition, and there's clearly no more gloss on the pages anymore. In fact, they seem to be even more yellow than our previous example. You can see that there are tears in the bottom, and it seems like this, if I had to take a guess, it seems like this comic book was held on a bookshelf. Given just on the fold to the bottom, you can see that there's a lot of tiny tears on the bottom. So that leads me to assume that it wasn't in a plastic covering. You want to give the pages a little yank just to make sure that the spine isn't falling apart. It seems like the spine is pretty good. There is some wear on the staples. As you can see, the staples are clearly visible, but it seems like you can flip the pages without fear of it falling apart. There's a stain there at the bottom. It's either, I'm not sure what it could be. It could be a runoff from the images on the top, or it could be just ink from a pen. But luckily, we can tell, given its age, as you can see here, it says 1989, so it's way older than, well, not way older, but it's a couple years older than our previous issue. And you can see that there are holes here in the bottom. I'm not really sure why there are so many holes, but it seems like they go almost through the entire issue, which is not great. Yeah, it's almost like someone put a stapler or put a staple through the issue for whatever reason, because it seems like the holes go through the whole thing. And there are some stains at the top. Now luckily it seems like all the images are really clear and all the text is readable, so that's good. You know, if you wanted to read the issue, you definitely could, which is, you know, what you're looking for when grading your comic books. You want it to be as new as possible, but this issue is clearly aged and there is some damage to it. Like I said, I did buy it at a flea market. I don't know how many times it was handed around or how many times it was used, but it does seem like quite a few people went through it. Now, luckily, it seems like we're not missing any pages or any pages are falling off, so we do have a complete comic book, which is great. All the advertisements are there, and you can see we keep finding new holes, which, you know, every hole brings down the grade just a little bit, so that isn't great for us. You want to keep inspecting your corners just to make sure that there are no tears or folds in the corners, and you want to be careful when flipping your pages, as always, you know, so that you don't end up damaging any more than you can. Here in this last page, I noticed that it's a bit loose. We can see there around the staples that it is starting to fall apart. Not severely, but it is looser than the other pages. So you want to be careful. Make sure that you don't pull on it too hard if you happen to find the same similar situation in your issues. But the last page looks pretty good. You want to check the back of the cover too, just like we did the front. Check the edges, check the spine. You can see that there is wear along the spine, but now, the tricky thing about old comic books is that back in the day, comic books were usually just meant to be read, they weren't meant to be collected. So usually you'll find them in a condition like this, read and whatnot. I'd give this a 3, to be honest, a 3 to a 3.5. The only reason I'd have it graded is just out of sentimental value. And just out of sentimental value, and so in order to maintain its quality, because once they're graded, they're put in a case so that they don't get any more damaged. But as you can see here are all the 3 comic books that I used. They're in their plastic coverings. Like I said, be sure to put your comics in plastic coverings, and let me know, just out of curiosity, what's the jewel in your collection? How do you take care of your issues? And if you're interested in reading more about comic book grading, I have included some links in the description so that you can do a little more research. And thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed.